What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Back to talk a little bit more about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. And I pretty much got everything off my chest last night around 3 in the morning when I posted my review of episode 8. But I still have a bad taste in my mouth, and I don't think I'll be able to wash the bad taste out of my mouth until I do this one final thing related to this topic, and that is actually share with people what actually does happen in the Second Age, because I feel like there's so many people who are going to see this show and never read the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, or they'll never read the Silmarillion, which I would strongly recommend, where like the last fifth is devoted to the Second Age. But I just hate the idea that people are going to be left with this show as their main impression of what the Second Age is. And so today, if you will forgive me, I'm just going to read the 2 pages in the appendices that summarize everything that happens in the Second Age of Middle-earth, and I will get a few, or not even a few, many names wrong, because like a lot of fantasy fans, I've been reading these names, kind of internally in my head for most of my life without ever actually saying them out loud. So I'll do my best with pronunciations, but if I get a few things wrong, just let me know down in the comments below. But all you need to know prior to the onset of the Second Age is that the First Age ends with the downfall of Morgoth and Sauron going into hiding. And if you don't want to hear this amazing prose being read by somebody who just does not have the dramatic chops to pull it off, I totally get it. Crack open the Lord of the Rings and you can read it for yourself. It's only a few pages. And then if you are curious, then you can crack open the Silmarillion and get the more in-depth version. But let's just dive right in. The Second Age. These were the dark years for men of Middle-earth, but the years of the glory of Numenor. Of events in Middle-earth, the records are few and brief, and their dates are often uncertain. In the beginning of this age, many of the High Elves still remained. Many of these dwelt in Lindon, west of the arid Luin, but before the building of the Barad-dûr, many of the Sindar passed eastward, and some established realms in the forest far away, where their people were mostly Sylvan elves. Thranduil, king in the north of Greenwood the Great, was one of these. In Lindon, north of the Lune, dwelt Gil-galad, last heir of the kings of the Noldor in exile. He was acknowledged as High King of the Elves of the West. In Lindon, south of the Lune, dwelt for a time Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol. His wife was Galadriel, greatest of elven women. She was the sister of Finrod Felagund, friend of men, once king of Nargothrond, who gave his life to save Beren, son of Barahir. Later, some of the Noldor went to Eregion upon the west of the Misty Mountains and near to the west gate of Moria. This they did because they learned that Mithril had been discovered in Moria. The Noldor were great craftsmen and less unfriendly to the dwarves than the Sindar, but the friendship that grew up between the people of Durin and the elven smiths of Eregion was the closest that there had ever been between the two races. Celebrimbor was lord of Eregion and the greatest of their craftsmen. He was descended from Feanor. So right there, you basically got the entire lay of the land, much of which was kind of teased in the show, but never properly exploited or taken advantage of. And then this passage of the appendices just dives right in to a timeline or a calendar, and we're just going to go year by year by every single thing that actually happens in the Second Age. Year 1, foundation of the Grey Havens and of Lindon. Year 32, the Edain reach Numenor. And then circa the year 40, many dwarves leaving their old cities in arid Luin go to Moria and swell its numbers. And then we have a big time jump of about 400 years up to the year 442, where we have death of Elrist Tar Menotor. For people who don't know, Elrist was the brother of Elrond and the first king of Numenor. And when given the choice between being human or elven, Elrist chose to be human, Elrond chose to be elven. And at any rate, that's when you get the foundation of Numenor. But then circa the year 500, Sauron begins to stir again in Middle-earth. At this point, he'd just been in hiding for many, many centuries since the end of the First Age. And then in the year 521, birth in Numenor of Silmarillion. The year 600, the first ships of the Numenorians appear off the coasts. 750, Eregion, founded by the Noldor. And then things start to get juicy. Circa the year 1000, Sauron, alarmed by the growing power of the Numenorians, chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. He begins the building of Barad-dûr. So already we're seeing just how much the show has completely butchered a lot of the official lore of the Second Age. But then in the year 1075, Tar Ankalime, I hope I'm saying that correctly, becomes the first ruling queen of Numenor. 1200, Sauron endeavors to seduce the Eldar. Gil-galad refuses to treat with him, but the smiths of Eregion are won over. The Numenorians begin to make permanent havens. And then we have a time jump of 300 years to circa 1500 of the Second Age. The elven smiths, instructed by Sauron, reach the height of their skill. They begin the forging of the Rings of Power. Now think about that. It's 300 years of Sauron living amongst the elves, seducing them and teaching them skills, whereas the show gave us about 5 minutes. And then 90 years later, in circa 1590, the three rings are completed in Eregion. Circa 1600, 10 years later, Sauron forges the One Ring in Orodruin. He completes the Barad-dûr. Celebrimbor perceives the designs of Sauron. So think about that. All in, we're talking about roughly 400 years total of the relationship between Sauron and the elves and the forging of the Rings of Power. This is what I meant in my review when I was talking about how it was such a giant missed opportunity where they just failed to capitalize on any of this text. Tolkien already gave the blueprint. He gave the backbone for everything. Why not just follow the blueprint? But moving on. In the year 1693, War of the Elves and Sauron begins. The three rings are hidden. 1695, Sauron's forces invade Eriador. Gil-galad sends Elrond to Eregion. 1697, Eregion laid waste. Death of Celebrimbor. The gates of Moria are shut. Elrond retreats with remnant of the Noldor and founds the refuge of Imladris, which would later be known by the name Rivendell to most people. And then in 1699, Sauron overruns Eriador. And this is when things start to get really juicy. In the year 1700, Tar Menastir sends a great navy from Numenor to Lindon. Sauron is defeated. 1701, Sauron is driven out of Eriador. The Westlands have peace for a long while. Circa 1800, from about this time onward, the Numenorians begin to establish dominions on the coasts. Sauron extends his power eastwards. The shadow falls on Numenor. 2251, so we have a 451-year time jump. Death of Tar Atanamir. Tar Ankalaman takes the scepter. Rebellion and division of the Numenorians begins. About this time, the Nazgul, or ring wraiths, slaves of the Nine Rings, first appear. So remember that in Season 2, when the ring wraiths are going to inevitably be created in like 30 seconds, I'm sure. But it took hundreds and hundreds of years for the people who were given the Nine Rings to slowly but surely change into the ring wraiths. Delayed gratification. It's a big part of Tolkien. But moving on to the year 2280, Umbar is made into a great fortress of Numenor. 2350, Peligir is built, becomes the chief haven of the faithful Numenorians. Peligir was referenced in the show, but obviously in a very different context. 2899, so this is more than 500 years later. Ara-Dûnacor takes the scepter. 3175, another massive time jump. Repentance of Tar Palantir, civil war in Numenor. 3255, Ar-Pharazôn the Golden seizes the scepter. People will recognize that name from the character of Pharazôn from the show, but obviously all this crap in the show is being done out of order and incorrectly. 3261, Ar-Pharazôn sets sail and lands at Umbar. 3262, Sauron is taken as prisoner to Numenor. 3262 to 3310, Sauron seduces the king and corrupts the Numenorians. So we're talking about 48 years of Sauron seducing the Numenorians. I'm sure when they get to that point in the show, it'll happen in half an episode. And things really get kicked up a notch in 3310 when Ar-Pharazôn begins the building of the Great Armament. 3319, Ar-Pharazôn assails Valinor. Downfall of Numenor, Elendil and his sons escape. 3320, Foundations of the Realm in Exile, Arnor and Gondor. The stones are divided, Sauron returns to Mordor, and I should mention that Sauron returns to Mordor as basically a spirit that can never again take on a pleasing form because he was in Numenor when it was destroyed and his body was destroyed. And then at this point, we start racing toward the conclusion. 3429, Sauron attacks Gondor, takes Minas Ithil and burns the White Tree. Isildur escapes down Anduin and goes to Elendil in the north. Anarion defends Minas Anor and Osgiliath. 3430, the last alliance of elves and men is formed. We all remember that from the opening of the Fellowship of the Ring. 3431, Gil-galad and Elendil march east to Imladris. Once again, Imladris is Rivendell. 3434, the host of the Alliance crosses the Misty Mountains. Battle of Daggerlad and defeat of Sauron. Siege of Barad-dûr begins. And then 6 years later, the siege is still ongoing. 3440, Anarion slain. 3441, Sauron overthrown by Elendil and Gil-galad who perish. Isildur takes the One Ring. Sauron passes away, and the ring wraiths go into the shadows. The Second Age ends. So there you have it. That is the full Second Age as written by Tolkien. And some people might cry foul and say, oh, you're sharing spoilers. We all know that the writers are going to screw everything up every step of the way, and that the show, when it finally runs its course, will bear almost no resemblance to the official sequence of events. But I just couldn't live with myself knowing that there's this giant show out there getting all these eyeballs that's completely distorting and destroying a really cool chapter in the history of Middle-earth. And admittedly, Tolkien did not write a lot about the Second Age, but he wrote enough. Or if they had chosen to use that skeleton and then flesh it out, it could have been really cool instead of this abomination that we've seen so far. And if you want to see an example of how you can take a big giant history and do time jumps and make it work, look no further than the House of the Dragon over at HBO. Admittedly, the time jumps they're employing are much smaller, but it just shows how a sophisticated audience with good taste can keep up with time jumps no problem. And instead, this show is basically taking a lot of crap, condensing it, basically a lot of events from thousands of years, condensing it down to very few, and then ripping and pulling from the Third Age, and basically just making a complete and total mess of things and not capitalizing on any of this cool material that was generated by J.R.R. Tolkien. So that is the end of my nerdy temper tantrum for the time being, and I eagerly look forward to reviewing Episode 9 of House of the Dragon on Sunday, where I'll get to officially wash the taste out of my mouth of this ridiculous fucking show. But I hope you enjoyed this little rant. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and give me a shout on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk about fantasy or Tolkien or any other topic. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.